The only thing that worries us a little bit about this move to a 90-degree perpendicular sample is we've been pretty adamant over a number of years about the sample having to be parallel to the muscle fibers, and that's how you get the best data and the most repeatable data. And so the data that we're collecting now, doing it at a 90 degrees to the stake surface looks good and as good or better. And so we may be eating some crow here as this becomes more widespread.
Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform dedicated to sharing breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the meats industry. On each episode, we will hear from meat specialists and professionals to talk about numerous topics in meat science. This podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Meat Export Federation, Ultrasource, the new standard for innovation,
IFA, Meat Processing Power.
Viscofan is a global leader and innovative partner in the food industry who provides solutions for the casing market.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. This is Phil Bass. I am flying solo. Francisco Najar is out conquering the world and making the world a better place for us meat enthusiasts. But that's okay. We're going to be just fine. There's only so much room that I can see on my Zoom screen anyhow, and we have filled up the screen entirely with three humble yet very influential meat scientists that maybe some of you don't know about, but it's time to bring their names to the forefront, especially some of the big movements and great advances that have come out of their place of work, which is the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. We have Dr. Andy King, Dr. Tommy Wheeler, and Dr. Steve Shackelford on the line. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, just a couple general topics that I want to bring about, and I'll let you guys decide who wants to cover which. But first, let's tell the listeners about what the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center is and why it is so important. What are some of the great impacts that particular facility brings?
So I think I'm going to tackle that one, Phil. So the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center is one of about 93 locations in the Agriculture Research Service, USDA. So the ARS is the research arm of USDA, and so there's about 2,000-ish scientists total doing research in all aspects of agriculture that you can think of. So here at the Meat Animal Research Center, we came into existence in 1964, and that when Congress transferred the Naval Ammunitions Depot that was located here for World War II to the USDA. And so if you ever come here, interesting things is all of the concrete bunkers that are mostly all still here. A few are gone, but they're mostly still here back from those days. So it is kind of an interesting view the first time you come here. But we are a USDA ARS research lab, and we get our funding appropriated by Congress on an annual basis. It's never on time, but it usually eventually comes. And so we just have to deal with that. But our property here is 34,000 acres. So we are one of the largest agriculture research centers, not only in the US, but probably in the world. So we have about 8,000 cows and about 2,000 ewes, and we farrow about 950 litters of pigs a year. So a lot of the research we do certainly is on the animals that we raise here ourselves. And we also raise all the feed for those animals as well. So we have about 120 federal employees that are the scientists and support staff and so forth. And then we also have about the same number of University of Nebraska employees. And those are the ones taking care of the animals and doing the farming, and are actually paid through a revolving account from the federal side that comes from receipts of sale of livestock and crops. So they're not really university employees, but in our system that it works out that that's the way it happens. So we have 5 research units here at the center, and those are genetics and breeding, nutrition, growth, theology, livestock biosystems, animal health, and then the group that we work in, which is meat safety and quality. And our group has 12 scientists, so the 3 of us in meat science, and then we have 9 microbiologists working on various aspects of meat safety. So I think that's kind of a summary of who we are.
That is, well, and that is a very impressive summary. I've been part of the meat science community for some time, but never did I realize just how massive that facility sounds like. I need to make a trip out.
That'd be great.
I'm assuming Clay Center is not necessarily right off the beaten path, but I will do my best to make it there one day.
It's not on the way to anywhere, so you gotta be coming here.
Well, and that makes sense. If that was an ammo depot at some point, you don't really want to put it right in front and center of everyone,
right?
And this is also a good example of how meat scientists apparently don't complain enough if they're making you live in bunkers. I think we need to update your housing facility there maybe a little bit, but we are a humble bunch, I suppose. So well, and that's a great synopsis of what the facility is. And for folks that are out there listening, it's so many opportunities that your tax dollars are paying for to help us advance the knowledge base of meat quality, animal production for that matter, but meat quality and meat safety. Something I want to go and discuss with you guys, that especially along the quality aspect, is something that was developed there. If my understanding is correct, something that was developed there at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, and especially with Dr. Wheeler, Dr. Shackelford, something called slice shear force. And so I'm bringing this to the forefront, to the topic of discussion at the moment. But I need you to maybe explain to the audience what that is, why it's important, and what are some of the other objectives that we've used for measuring tenderness in meat products. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, so we were trying to develop a system to classify beef carcasses for tenderness. And we were looking at a lot of different biochemical measurements. And the one thing that seemed to ring true is the best thing that we could do to predict how tender the ribeye and strip loin from that carcass were going to be after aging was to measure Warner-Batzeller's shear force at 1 day post-mortem when we graded the beef. So we ultimately concluded that's what we should do, is develop a system to automate measurement of tenderness of beef carcasses at chain speed. And we set out about how to automate Warner-Batzeller's shear force. And through the process of that, we came to the conclusion that it would actually be a lot easier to simply take a slice from the steak. And the dimensions of that slice were somewhat set about by the Warner-Batzeller's shear force attachment on a universal testing machine. And that had a width of about 7 centimeters. So we said, we're going to make this slice 5 centimeters long so that it will fit in that attachment. We're going to change the blade that we shear through that sample from being the V shape that we use for Warner-Batzeller's shear force to a flat blade, but it's got the same thickness, the same half round bevel. And then we started about the process of how we could take that sample parallel to the muscle fibers like we have traditionally done for Warner-Batzeller's shear force. And ultimately we came up with a way to do it. We kind of, as we started trying to work on automation of that, we came to the realization of this is actually a better way for us to do routine data collection if we could come up with a way that we could routinely sample for that. And Tommy's really good at drawing things up, and he kind of mocked up, this is what we need for a box. We got one of our people to start cutting some cutting board to make that box. We actually went to my garage and made a wooden box to mount that cutting board on. And pretty much the next day we were doing slice shear force with that mocked up box. And ultimately, we've had a couple of different commercial vendors that have made boxes that have been sold to other labs. So that took care of the longissimus, and it was fairly easy to translate that from beef longissimus to pork longissimus, pretty much exactly the same process. A little more difficult to translate it to lamb longissimus because you can't take a 5 centimeter long slice. But if you cook 2 chops, you can take a 2.5 centimeter long slice and lay them end to end, and then you're shearing exactly the same thing as we do in beef and pork.
Mhm.
And then we started the process of developing this technology for other muscles. And one of those other muscles that we frequently get questions about tenderness on is the gluteus medius.
Mhm.
And it happens to be one of the hardest muscles to do slice shear force on, because to make the samples parallel to the muscle fibers, the protocol is exactly opposite depending on which side of the carcass the muscle comes from. And a lot of people, when they collect samples, they don't know which side of the carcass it came from. And moreover, by the time they have them cut into steaks, you can't tell which side of the carcass it came from. And I can tell you, even if you're at the subprimal level, us 3 experts, if we do 100 top butts in a steak cutting plant, we'll get 97 of them correct. We will not get 100 of them correct. History has shown that repeatedly. So we were having a discussion about one of the commercial packers wanted to address the top sirloin, and I brought up the point, and we had looked at parallel versus perpendicular sampling in longissimus many moons ago. And I said, it doesn't have the dramatic impacts on shear force doesn't have the dramatic impacts on slice shear force that it does for Warner-Bratzer shear force. And I said, if we modified gluteus sampling, then we could do a much broader sample than the 3 slices that with the parallel process we take from GM. And Andy's the one that said, we've absolutely got to do it. He said, it's an impossible procedure for us experts to master, and people with less experience have no chance. So we set about the process of looking at going to perpendicular sampling for gluteus medius, and it allowed us to get 6 slices out of a steak instead of 3. It increased the repeatability of slice shear force for that muscle, and had 0 impact on the mean slice shear force of that muscle. So that brought us back to, well, should we modify how we do it for longissimus? And in beef, it's been 1 slice from the steak, taken from a section that comes from the lateral end of the steak. And on a lot of steaks, you could actually get 2 sections. We looked at that, and in most cases you can. And in most cases, you can get 3 slices from each one of those sections. What we were able to conclude was we don't want to do 2 sections, even though it actually helps the repeatability. The medial section is much more tender, and we'll end up biasing the value relative to the value that we've traditionally had with the 45-degree procedure. So we've settled on taking 3 slices from a section on the lateral end of the stake, and it does improve the repeatability of that procedure. Slows down the throughput a little bit, but still allows us to do 200 or more steaks in a day. I think our record is 1,100 and something slices in a day.
Oh my.
The mission of USMEF is to increase the value and profitability of the U.S. beef, pork, and lamb industries by enhancing demand for their products in export markets through a dynamic partnership of all stakeholders. Simply put, USMEF is putting U.S. meat on the world's table.
Well, and for the processors out there listening, if you're less familiar with some of the terminology that Dr. Shackelford was talking about, I'll kind of boil it down a little bit. But Warner Brasler shear force, this is a technique that's been, I mean, it's coming up on 100-year-old technology, essentially, right? It's an idea of mimicking our incisors, of taking little cores out of a steak that's been cooked to a consistent degree of doneness, putting it into a machine and letting that machine, quote unquote, bite it. You can't see my fingers, but I'm using air quotes, quote unquote, bite this thing. And so how much force does it take to bite through that? Well, it's a long process. And so the idea with what Dr. Shackelford was talking about is that we need something that maybe can speed this process up a little bit. And so what you developed was your prototype, which I really hope you still have your prototype for the Shackelford Museum later on. Do you still have that?
We have museums.
Multiple.
It's in one of the bunkers. We won't tell you which one.
No, it's all still in building 17.
Okay. But so this idea of, okay, so now we can actually take a single steak right off that fresh carcass, right after grading, I'm assuming, but you take that steak right off that fresh carcass and cook it and run it through this sampling procedure that's going to be so much quicker than our kind of, I like to call it gold standard, but the old Warner Brasler shear force method, and that's this slice shear method. So based off of what you just told me, with kind of the progression of slice shear force, do you still need that special box with the 2-bladed knife and everything, or are we moving away from that now?
No, so the sampling for the perpendicular procedure, it's actually a different box because the holes are perpendicular to the surface. And the one supplier from Manhattan, Kansas, they've developed a little bit different a method, and we've actually kind of adapted what they have for a 90-degree sampling as well, so that hopefully we can get them to start manufacturing that as other labs start to look at using the 90-degree protocol to make it where they can get the equipment to do so.
What I love about both methods, Warner Brasler shear force, slice shear force, is that yes, you do need to have some specialized equipment, but it's not specialized equipment that's exorbitantly expensive, right? I mean, we're still cooking steaks, we're still cutting steaks, and so maybe it's not quite as readily available for a really small processor. But if you are a meat processor of size, these are techniques that could be used, and I'm assuming that there are instructions that are out there that are readily available. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
The only thing that worries us a little bit about this move to a 90-degree perpendicular sample is we've been pretty adamant over a number of years about the sample having to be parallel to the muscle fibers. And that's how you get the best data and the most repeatable data. And so the data that we're collecting now, doing it at a 90 degrees to the stake surface looks good and as good or better. And so we may be eating some crow here as this becomes more widespread.
Well, that's research. We search and then we research, and
Right.
and we continue to discover maybe better ways of doing things. And yeah, I mean, sometimes we just have to set aside our pride from the past and look and say, hey, there's a better way of doing this now, and
Yep.
that's okay.
Absolutely.
The mass of the sample that we shear through for slice shear force is so much greater than the mass of a Warner Brotzer shear force core that I think it fundamentally changes some of the answers. And Tommy and Muhammad did research way back when that showed the difference between parallel and perpendicular for sampling for Warner Brotzer shear force was about a 50% reduction in shear force when you went to perpendicular sampling. But with slice shear force, that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, and that makes a lot of sense. And again, for the processors out there that are less familiar with this, look up the slice shear force technique and Warner Brotzer shear force technique for that matter to kind of better understand, because once you, this is where a picture is worth 1,000 words, but once you kind of see the technique, they're simple enough. They're simple enough for a meathead like me to use, and so I use them regularly here in our lab. But it's a technique that is readily repeatable. Again, it doesn't cost a lot, but it does give you some really strong data to put back into your management of your process. And so, I appreciate you talking about that and talking a little bit about the history of that. And honestly, it's been around for the idea of slice shear now has been around for a number of years. Is that right? Couple decades now. So yeah. So if you didn't know about it, shame on you. No. All right. So that's the topic of the tenderness evaluations and techniques of measuring tenderness that I wanted to talk about with this group. Now I want to just take a little bit of a slightly different approach and look at some other quality attributes that are being investigated at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center. And I believe, Dr. King, this is kind of your area, but lean color guidelines. Can you talk a little bit about what you've developed and why that's important for the meat industry?
Well, so probably dating back to in the early 90s, the American Meat Science Association put a committee together that put together some guidelines on how to kind of approach meat color measurement and research and kind of what data that committee thought was important. And that in that document really got a lot of use. It was and by about the early 2000s, it was, or the late the early about 2010 or so, it was kind of outdated a little bit there. And so actually, Tommy was the chair of the research protocol for AMSA, and I was on that committee as well. And he approached Melvin Hunt about chairing a revision of the meat color guidelines. And Hunter, if you know Hunter, you can almost hear him say it, said, I'd be happy to be the idea guy as long as Andy will do all the work. And so,
and for those of you who are unfamiliar with Dr. Melvin Hunt, the godfather of meat color. So yeah,
exactly. Right. So I got the chance to work with Hunter, and I would say that he did a lot more than just throw out ideas for that revision. But we put together a revision of the meat color guidelines in 2012. We really went to a lot of effort to bring in a lot of researchers who were very, well, I'd say cutting edge in meat color at the time, and really tried to have, we had reviews of color chemistry, how the physics of light reflecting off meat affect color perception, how to design display studies. and even some pretty detailed laboratory techniques that are really common for meat color research, along with recommendations at each step of these are the factors you need to consider when you design an experiment. This is the information that you need to put in a publication when you're ready to publish that. And so that when someone was go to that study and read about it, that they could adequately evaluate the data and make judgments based on your data. And so that document is still available. It is actually set up into about 10, I believe, standalone chapters, I would say, that you could go to and wouldn't necessarily have to read the whole document, but you could go there and figure out if you needed to do a display study or you needed to measure cured meat color or some things like that. You could go to those sections and read that. And when the Meat and Muscle Biology Journal came out, the AMSA board at the time decided that it would be great if the color guidelines were in the journal, if they were peer reviewed. And so they asked us to do a revision at that point. And at that point, I thought, okay, we're going to do a quick tune-up. We'll turn this around in a couple of months and everything will be good. That was 7 years ago. And so it turned out to be a just a overhaul, but I think we rebodied it and vehicle now. But it's a lot of the same information, but it's now the body of the documents formatted more like a review article, and it has 5 standalone supplementary documents that have some of the more step-by-step, but we worked really, really hard to try to have those things that we felt were really important for people to consider, not only for research, but if you're a processor, you're having some color problems, that you can reach in there and find some information that at least get you started and get you asking the right questions. Like I said, Hunter is definitely the idea guy. We brought in a lot of really great scientists, some at the end of their careers. Some of us were kind of in the middle, and then some are just really getting started and really doing some great things. And my job was to kind of try to keep an eye on how it all fit together, to reformat it into this massive journal article and shepherd it through the publishing process. And so right now it's been through peer review, it's been accepted by the journal. In fact, if you go to Meat and Muscle Biology, you can read the abstract. There's not a ton of information there, but hopefully we'll be getting the galley proofs before too long. But just be patient because it's a massive document. It's going to take a while to format it for the journal, and hopefully it'll be available. And I really hope it's useful to everybody. And when it becomes available. So.
Well, and I know that the meat color guidelines, it's something that we use almost on a daily basis here at the University of Idaho with our research team. And you're absolutely right in that it's a document. It's very much a living document right now, but hopefully we have some even more irrefutable proof as to some of the techniques that have been developed. But it's a great step-by-step reference point for so many of us meat science researchers to go and just make sure that we're doing everything the same. We're using the same techniques so that we can. There's repeatability to this. Others across the country, across the world, could use these standards so that one lab could do a project and another lab could do a project, and we could compare results. And that's the power of a document like this. Is that right, Andy?
I agree. The one thing I was actually there was some discussion early on of actually calling them standards. I was reluctant, in fact, refused to do that because I didn't want it to be, you have to do it this way and you can't move the science along. I wanted it as guidelines of, okay, you need to look at these things, you need to consider these things, but you're going to have to adapt these things to put your study together to answer the questions that you're asking. So, I mean, the cookie cutter approach that I might very successfully might not work for you. You need to understand why those guidelines are in place, what their purpose is, and then use them to put your own protocols together.
That's well, and I'm glad you said that. That's a really good point. And yes, it's a guideline. It's a guidebook. It's kind of like when I hear people say the meat buyer's guide is the Bible of meat cuts. Well, it's kind of more just a guide, like it says on, on the label. It's a starting point. It's a reference point. So great points, and man, I appreciate you working on that. It sounds like it was this was quite the experience for you, Andy, after 7 years of deliberation.
Yeah, it was a great experience. It's committee work always takes longer, and it got so big that it kind of got to be where it was really hard. That whole concept of I've got a couple of hours this afternoon I'm going to spend on this. You didn't get much done. You really needed several days to be able to figure in there, especially that 2012 document by design had a lot of redundancy. When we went to a single document standpoint, that all needed to come out. But at the same time, it was really hard when you're dealing with a 200-page document to understand, okay, if I cut this out here, is it still somewhere else? And, is that information still in the document somewhere? And so it took a lot of time. There was a lot of, oh, I shouldn't have cut that out. I better go back and find it and put it back in. But it took the committee was great. Every time we asked for something, we got it. And Hunter was, always, a lot of times he was like, okay, we got to get this done, and we got it done. And the journal's been great. Dr. Lonergan, Huff Lonergan, was really, really helpful for getting it through the review process. And our reviewers raised some really good points that were a challenge to address, but I'm glad they did. And like I said, I'm really proud of how it is, and I really hope it's useful.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned it's a lengthy document, and that should not discourage our processors out there from using this, because even if you reference the 2012 document, it's still very relevant, and I would say still very easy to use. A lot of pictures, a lot of visuals, and I'm assuming the new one has that as well.
So most of those will be in the supplementary documents. Mm-hmm. But it may be the only quote unquote journal article you see with a table of contents, but it's in there to help you navigate it. Yeah. And I think it will be, like I said, it's a different format than the old version, but I think it's still very useful. The feedback we've gotten so far has been really positive, and I hope it, like I said, we'll see it. I wouldn't be intimidated if someone who, the length of the document, I don't think should be something that scares people away, because like I said, there it is sections, and I would tell a graduate student they need to read it from cover to cover. It'll help them, especially if they're getting ready for prelims. It's a lot of information in one place, but for the rest of us, it shouldn't be too hard to find the information you need and move on with your day.
Yeah. Well, after a project like that, it sounds like, Andy, that you're ready for retirement, and that's awesome. Before you do, something we like to ask all of our guests on MeatsPad is, how did you get to where you are? And I'm not saying Nebraska. I'm saying, how did you get into the meat world that you're in? And so, Andy, if you don't mind, would you mind kicking this off?
Sure. I grew up in around agriculture. Actually, my dad was a county extension agent, and I kind of got really exposed to what research can do for producers. And I really wanted to be a producer, but that really wasn't in the cards for me. And for a while, I thought I wanted to be a vet, like a lot of us that go to school, and kind of got in there and figured out that wasn't where I wanted to be. But I got involved in meats judging, and I got through a series of really happy coincidences, wound up kind of getting to know Dan Hale and Davey Griffin, and being involved in extension in meat science at Texas A&M, and got really involved there, and just kind of fell in love with meat science and really everything about it. Wound up going to Kansas State for my master's. And while I was there, I worked with Dr. Michael Dykman, and I went to him with kind of a list of ideas that I wanted to pursue for my master's thesis. And there were some things there that in that list that he wasn't really set up to do, but he said, there's some guys up at Clay Center that are, and let's get them on the phone and talk to them. So I wound up kind of spending a couple of weeks in Tommy's lab and doing my master's thesis. And I went back to A&M for my PhD, and once again came back to Clay Center. And so when it was time to wrap it up and get done, it just so happened that Tommy and Muhammad were looking for a postdoc, and I was able to jump in and take that position, and it was very fortunate it turned into a permanent position. And so been able to do some really interesting things. And so I tell people that I've been here for 15 years, but I'm still the new guy. So,
well, you're working with some folks that have definitely been in it for a little while, but also an amazing team. So, Tommy, Steve.
So I grew up on a farm in West Texas, and was in 4-H and FFA and just around agriculture growing up. And in FFA, I was on the meat judging team in high school. So I knew when I got to Texas Tech that I wanted to get involved with that. I was actually in ag economics, was my major. Got involved with the judging team and enjoyed that a lot. And then if any of you know Gordon Davis at Texas Tech, when I was there, he can be very persuasive and convinced me that I should get a master's in meat science. So I did that, and figured out that this really is something that I really enjoy, and decided to get a PhD, and went to Texas A&M and got my PhD with Russell Cross and Steve Smith. And Russell had at one time in his career been at Clay Center, and they happened to have a vacancy when I was getting done, and ended up fortunate enough to basically land in my dream job. And I've been here almost 33 years now, and as a scientist, and then since 2007 as the research leader for the group. And it's just been a fantastic ride, and something different every day, and it's still really loving all the stuff that we get to do.
And myself, I also grew up the son of a county agent, although he moved on from that occupation early on in my life. But we had the 4-H livestock projects and other such activities. When we slaughtered the 4-H steers at Locker plant, we always went in 2 weeks later before those carcasses were going to get cut up, and collected carcass data and traced ribeyes. And here I am 40 something years later, and we're still tracing ribeyes. But when I got to the University of Georgia, my sister, who had just graduated with her animal science degree, said, "You need to talk to Bo Reagan and see if you can get on the meats judging team." And I did, and that spiraled out of control into a career. At the conclusion of my master's project, Mark Miller was trying to set up some collaborations with the Meat Animal Research Center, and convinced me to come out here for essentially postmasters. And I did, and it was a great experience. And then ended up back here while I was doing my PhD research at Texas A&M. Did my dissertation research here, and have been on staff here since 1992.
Wow. Well, it's a pleasure to get a chance to visit with you guys. It's an absolute honor to know you, of course. for those out there listening, make sure you get to know the three musketeers here. Dr. King, Dr. Wheeler, Dr. Shackelford. Hopefully we get a chance to meet up in person soon. But guys, thank you so much for this. Before we leave, how can people learn more about the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center and maybe some of the topics we talked about?
So you can go to the USDA ARS Meat Animal Research Center website, and there's some basic information there. But maybe just give one of us a call or an email. That might be the best way. Who knows?
You got it. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.